This is lesson number 7, the characteristics of seed plants. In class you did an activity where you were asked to basically take a seed on a journey all the way until it became a plant. And it was almost like a book that you had created where you could see each one of the steps that occur. And we're going to take a look at those a little bit more specifically in this lesson. And so I want to get some of the main notes down. And so let's take a look at what all characteristic seed plants have. So they all have certain characteristics. And one of those characteristics are the fact that they all have a vascular tissue. And the vascular tissue is used to get food and water and support to the plant. The second one that they all have in common is they have to be able to reproduce. And they do that in the form of making pollen and seeds. And they use those to reproduce. The third thing that they have in common is that they have a root system. The fourth thing that they have in common is that they have stems. And the fifth thing that they all have in common is their ability to create leaves. So all seed plants have these 5 things in common. And we're going to take a look at each one of them. The first one we want to look at is vascular tissue. Vascular tissue is important, as we had said, because of the fact that you have to be able to move food up and down. Now, the issue of this is really in the fact that most plants live on land. And because they live on land, they have to be able to move water from the bottom to the top, or they have to be able to move food from the top to the bottom. And they have 2 ways of doing this. One of the ways is called phloem. And phloem, by definition, is going to be tissue where food moves. And so it's going to be almost like an elevator system where the food is going to move from the leaves down to the entire plant. And so imagine that if this is a leaf and this is the trunk of the tree, it has to be able to move the food that's occurring through photosynthesis down throughout the entire plant. And so phloem is like an elevator system. It's basically going from the top down to the bottom. The other term is called xylem, and xylem is used for water. So it's tissue where water moves. And so now when we have a type of plant and there's roots, it has to be able to take the water from the roots and move it all the way up to the top of the tree. And this is important because of the fact that a lot of the types of seed plants that we're going to look at are oftentimes extremely tall. And so this elevator system has to be able to move phloem, food. And the way that I remember it is that phloem has, let's see if I can change the color here. Let's go with an orange color. But there is an O that's in phloem, and there's an O that's in food, and so that's how I remember phloem and xylem. I'm sorry, phloem and food, and the difference between xylem and phloem. And xylem is where water is going to be moving. So that's what vascular tissue is used for. Now, as we look at the next one, we got to talk about pollen and seeds. So plants have a way of reproducing using pollen and seeds. And so this is important because of the fact that seed plants don't just have to use water now to reproduce. They can make something that is called pollen. And pollen is a tiny structure that contains cells that will later become sperm. And that's important because of the fact that now what they can do is they can directly deliver to the eggs for reproducing. So this is a very important process of reproduction. And the seed, which is also a definition, is going to develop and contain young plants inside. So what happens is that you have this pollen that gets delivered and meets up with the egg, and it creates a seed which is going to eventually become the new plant. So the question of how seeds become new plants is something that we need to look at. And basically what happens is once we have a seed, it reaches an area, and if the conditions are favorable, the plant will sprout. And that's important because then it's going to begin to grow. And so if it's able to start growing, now it's able to move on and be in a position where it's going to be reproduced and it's going to start to develop a new plant. And seeds have three parts to them. So seeds have three parts to them. The first part is called the embryo. The second part is called the stored food. And the third one is called the seed coat. So the embryo, by definition, is the fertilized egg. And this is after the sperm and the egg have met up and exchanged their materials. They create the embryo, which is the fertilized egg. The stored food is a term that's called a cotyledon. And this is when you have one or more seed leaves. And those store food. The seed coat is what keeps from drying out the food. And so those are the three parts of a seed. And the seeds have to be able to disperse from one another. And so in order to disperse, we call it seed dispersal. And seed dispersal is done in a couple of methods. The first method can be done through an organism or an animal eating the seed, and through digestion, it releases the seed. Or what can happen is that it can be moved through water. So if it rains or if there's a river nearby, it can transport it, or through wind, or through another method that is called elongation, where it ejects the seed. Alright, so those are the different methods. Of course, there's ones where it gets on the fur and it moves through organisms, but either it moves it through animals, water, wind, or ejection of the seeds, known as elongation. So once they have been dispersed and they have the right conditions, it's now time for them to start to germinate. And so germination is an important process for the seeds because of the fact that they have to be able to begin growing. So germination, which is going to occur when the embryo begins to grow and pushes out the seed. Okay, so the embryo, which remember is the fertilized egg, now is going to begin to grow again, and it's going to push out the seed. And so that's what germination is. And it's going to use the stored food from the cotyledon, and it's also going to use water from the environment to help it begin to grow. And it's going to also start to develop a root system. And so the roots will grow downward, and as they begin to grow downward, they're going to start to be able to absorb some of the water, and what we're going to have is then a seedling. So what we end up having is a seedling. So imagine that this is the seed, and it still has that leaf or that cotyledon that's on the inside, and this is going to start to grow upward, so that way it can get the sunlight. And the seed is going to start to break apart as it pushes its way, the leaf starts to push its way through, and we're going to start to see some roots that are going to begin to grow down towards the ground. And so at this point in time, we'd say that it's well on its way to starting to develop. Now, we're going to focus in on this root, okay? Because of the fact that roots are how the plant is going to get its water, so roots, looking at them, are used to anchor the plant into the ground, and it's also going to be used to absorb water and minerals, and it's also going to be used to store food. Okay, so these are the three things that plants use their roots for: to anchor them into the ground, also to help absorb water and minerals, and also to store food. And there are two types of roots. So there are two types of roots. The first one we're going to look at is called the fibrous root system. And basically, these are messy. They're kind of tangled, and you see these in corn and also in onions. And imagine that that's the onion, and it's going to have lots and lots of roots that are kind of tangled with one another. The other one, so that was the fibrous, is called a taproot, and the taproot is a little bit more organized. It has one main root, and there's branches that are coming off that root. And so an example of that one would be a carrot. So imagine that this is the carrot, and coming straight down would be the root, and then it would just have them branching off of there. And so those are the two different types. There's a fibrous and a taproot, and the structure of the root looks a little something like this. So the structure of it is where you have the tip of the root being round, and it's covered by a root cap. And that root cap which is a vocab word, is used to protect the root from injury. So basically it's used as a protection device. And so you have basically this root system that's going down, whether it's a fibrous or if it's just a tap root. What you do have going on though is that these roots are rounded and they actually have like a little protection that's over the top. That's the root cap. And if you were to look at these very closely, there's little hairs that do come off of them. And those hairs help out in surface area trying to collect more water and disperse further away from just one spot. And so the roots have root hairs, they have a root cap, and the tip of them are round and they help to absorb the water. Now, so if this is the bottom of it, we have to start to work our way up, and the way we work our way up is through something that is called a stem. A stem is responsible for carrying substances between the root and leaves. It also provides support, and there are two different types of stems. They're either herbaceous or woody. And the herbaceous ones are going to be, so herbaceous are usually soft, non-wood, and the woody ones are obviously harder, and also they are much more strong. And so those are the different types of stems, and that's what their responsibilities are for. Now, if you were to take a cross-section of a leaf, so if we were looking at not of a leaf but of a stem, what we would see is that on the very, very, very outside there is a region that is called the inner bark. And that inner bark, outer bark. Let me erase that for you. Apologize. It was one step in. That one is called the outer bark. And it is responsible for protection. So we use that one for protection. If you go one more in, this part now would be the inner bark, and that one is responsible for the living phloem. And the next one in is called the cambium. I'll draw that one over here, which is the cambium. And the cambium is responsible for creating new xylem and phloem. And if we were to go another layer in to this one here, that one would be what we would refer to as being the sapwood. And the sapwood is important because of the fact that it is where the active xylem is found. And one more layer in takes us to another area that is called the heartwood. And the heartwood is responsible for inactive xylem. And then finally, the far inside is where we would find the annual rings. And basically that tells us how old the tree is, or the plant is. So these are the different parts of it. So you have the outer bark, you have the inner bark, you have the cambium, you have the sapwood, you have the heartwood, and you have the annual rings, all of which are a part of the plant. The last little part we're going to get through is dealing with leaves. Leaves are important because of the fact that they are what capture sunlight. They are doing that through photosynthesis. They have veins that are responsible for transporting the xylem and phloem, and they also have an area that's called a stomata, which is a small opening or pore on the surface of the leaf where gases enter and leave. So these are important because this is what really helps us with photosynthesis. You have to be able to take in the carbon dioxide, you have to be able to release the oxygen, and it's done through this part of a small opening or a pore, which is responsible for this process. And then finally the last little one is called transpiration. And transpiration is the amount of water evaporating from leaves. So basically it's how much water is evaporating from the leaves, and that's also a vocab word. So was stomata, and so was veins. So that's a look at how a seed becomes a plant. There's a lot of steps that go into it, and so make sure you get these notes down, and we'll talk to you later.